The events of the past week have renewed the focus on President Bashar al-Assad and the civil war in Syria. We wanted to better understand the evolution of the war and the different sides with a stake in the fighting.
Obama announced his plan to expand airstrikes against ISIS to include targets inside Syria.
So forget the Syria debate. We need a debate on why we're always debating whether to bomb someone.
What did Syrian officials have to say?
There were actually warplanes in the air at all times, or almost all times that we were there. You could also every once in a while hear thuds from what appeared to be bombs being dropped.
And what strikes me is we shed tears, but there are no tears here. He doesn't cry once. That little boy is in total shock. He's stunned inside his home one moment, and the next, lost in the flurry and the fury of war and chaos.
Americans. On Tuesday, Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad launched a horrible chemical weapons attack on innocent civilians. Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched.
Please listen carefully.
Syria's civil war is an offshoot of the much larger narrative of the Arab Spring. And some of these clashings of kind of old post-colonial nationalism in the vein of Nasser and like Egyptian pan-Arabism, right, intersecting with a much younger generation's view of a revolutionary direct democracy. And so the Arab Spring spreads. It starts in Tunisia, and it quickly spreads out Libya and Egypt, Jordan and Cyprus. But the difference with Syria is that it was seen as a linchpin to Russian and Chinese foreign diplomacy in the Middle East. Syria being an ally of Iran, and Iran being Russia's proxy in many ways in the Middle East. And so when Russia, Iran, and China entrench around Assad, you now have a leader who's of an ethnic minority, propped up by outside powers with a tremendous amount of money, fighting against what is essentially a guerrilla insurgency. Right? Starts off as street rebellions in much the same way as Egypt, and then when the street rebellions are met with absolute brutal force by the Syrian government, those street rebellions turned into street militias, and then street militias turned into full-fledged military guerrilla warfare. Assad, with the mentorship of Russia, is told that this whole conflict would be won or lost on public opinion. And so Assad empties Syrian prisons and encourages both kind of like petty criminals as well as hardcore Islamists to go join the rebel side. Why would you want me gone when I leave? This is who's going to take over. And that is really the birth pangs of ISIS.
ISIL, ISIS,
ISIS,
Daesh,
ISIS, ISIL, IS, Daesh. These names all refer to the same militant group, the Islamic State.
And so the second that Russia makes itself a heavy player in Syria, it's almost inevitable that the US now has to take some type of action, right? It only fits into the paradigm between these two superpowers. Two things that we constantly hear about in terms of forms of US intervention are drones, as well as military trainers. Oftentimes these trainers are Blackwater employees. These are mercenaries. These are part of that black market military industrial complex. That's not that much of an underground thing, but it's just not spoken about. Drone strikes have proven themselves to be, in my opinion, a crime against humanity. The amount of civilians who have been killed by drone strikes, that automatically played into all of those forces that Assad had released from the prisons, all of the forces that were fomenting around what would become ISIL. While on the other hand, the population is still shell-shocked from Iraq and Afghanistan.
And open the courtyard. Yeah, roger. I just estimated there's about 20 of them. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't know if that's... Hey, Bushmaster Element, copy at White 6. That's a weapon. Yeah. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18. We'll call for exchange by Charlie Mike Bravo. Speed 3. 6 individuals with AK-47s. Request permission to engage.
Roger that. We have no personnel east of our position, so you are free to engage over.
You're clear. Alright, firing. Line here. When the state line out. Let me know when you get it. We'll shoot. Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260s.
Come on, fire. Hey, Roger. Keep shoot. Keep shoot.
Bushmaster 2-6, Bushmaster 2-6. We need to move time now.
Alright, we just engaged all 8 individuals.
And so they're not going to support boots on the ground warfare in Syria, but they're also not willing to say that we're not going to do anything. And in classic Western fashion, we're also saying we don't want to take any of the victims of our atrocities, right? Close down the borders, don't take refugees. We don't want the victims of our own acts and deeds to come here. It's a crisis and it's a tragedy, and I don't know where it ends.
Thank you.